James Carville knew how to win, and he blamed the Democratic losses this November 2nd on stupid wokeness, to which AOC fired back that wokeness is a term almost exclusively used by older people these days. So that should tell you all you need to know. What? This is a term folks like you brought out very recently and had been proudly displaying at every march since. Just last year, The Guardian declared woke the word of our era. I guess they didn't get the memo from the Mean Girls Club. We don't use that emoji anymore. Woke, please. We say fetch now.
That was Bill Maher taking on AOC for denying reality and pushing a woke agenda that's working against America. You'd think that after losing the elections, the DNC might finally course-correct and move toward the center. But nope. Its leading figures, especially AOC, seem intent on chasing wokeism to the very last breath.
That said, I would love to have AOC on this show. There's so much to admire there. I was one of her first supporters for the Green New Deal idea. But that will probably never happen because Democrats don't go anywhere these days where they're not pre-adored. And that's my last bit of advice to them. Go where the amen corner isn't. Do Fox News. Be brave. Come here. Go everywhere. Winning is about expanding the election.
And Maher isn't backing down for a second. Welcome to today's video, where Maher completely dismantles AOC's woke arguments. Buckle up. It's about to get fiery.
What a great strategy, never missing an opportunity to remind voters how lame and clueless and hopelessly uncool they are, especially since those are the ones who actually vote. But okay, fine. What word would you like us to use for the plainly insane excesses of the left that are not liberalism, but something completely different? Because you can't have that word liberal from us and think it should cover things like canceling Lincoln and teaching third graders they're oppressors. That's all your new thing.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. AOC isn't actually worried about being woke. She's worried about being called woke. It's the political equivalent of saying, I love everything this ideology stands for, but please don't use that embarrassing label in public. In other words, even as she tries to downplay wokeness, AOC somehow manages to stay unmistakably woke. And that's exactly what Maher's calling out. He's not just debating semantics, he's challenging her entire circle of self-proclaimed woke revolutionaries, who insist they're merely progressives even though their policies have strayed far from traditional liberal values. That Maher's point is simple. Liberalism used to mean open debate, common sense, and listening to the people. Now, thanks to AOC and her ideological entourage, it's turning into a hypermoral, hypersensitive crusade that barely resembles the liberalism it claims to represent.
A more pertinent question to ask about the word woke might be, why in such a short time has it gone from a rallying cry to a pejorative? If the word only made you think of rational, deserved causes like teaching a less whitewashed version of American history, AOC would still want to own it. But it's a joke, because it makes you think of people who wake up offended and take orders from Twitter, and their oversensitivity has grown tiresome. That said...
Exactly. Figures like AOC and Bernie Sanders don't represent classic liberal values, values that once stood for free speech, open dialogue, and practical solutions. Ironically, they don't even reflect the original meaning of woke, which was about staying alert to real, tangible social injustices. Over time, the term has been twisted, stretched, and applied to a set of extreme ideas most ordinary people can't relate to. What started as a call for awareness has become a cultural performance, where the goal isn't justice, but appeasing a tiny group perpetually offended by everything. Instead of focusing on policies that help working-class Americans, the movement obsessively targets language policing, niche ideological battles, and purity tests nobody asked for. And that, Maher argues, is why the modern woke agenda feels so disconnected from real liberalism and from real people.
That said, I would love to have AOC on this show. There's so much to admire there. I was one of her first supporters for the Green New Deal idea. But that will probably never happen because Democrats don't go anywhere these days where they're not pre-adored. And that's my last bit of advice to them. Go where the amen corner isn't. Do Fox News. Be brave. Come here. Go everywhere. Winning is about expanding the election.
For anyone who's been following this channel over the past few months, you know this isn't the first time Maher has challenged Democrats to appear on his show. He's practically rolled out the red carpet, sent personal invitations, and even called them out publicly. but they still won't show up. The reason is painfully obvious. They know Maher isn't going to pander or let them recite rehearsed talking points unchallenged. Yes, he's a Democrat, but he's the kind of Democrat who still values tough questions, honest debate, and calling out nonsense when he sees it. That alone makes him radioactive to today's overly sensitive, ultra-curated political class. They know that if they sit across from Maher, he'll press them on inconsistencies, expose contradictions in their rhetoric, and likely dismantle their woke narratives on national television. So they avoid him, because facing Maher means facing reality.
You can give the people all the goodies Joe Manchin will allow, and it doesn't seem to buy their love. Why? Why is the party that supports so many issues that benefit the middle class still considered out of touch by 62% of Americans? In plain English, nobody likes a snob. Hillary Clinton didn't have anyone on rural research or outreach when she ran in 2016 until the race tightened just before the election. Then they hired one. And where was his office? Brooklyn. True story. Politics is local, not locally sourced. It's not artisan. It's art and stand.
These days, the DNC seems more invested in political theater than actually tackling the issues that keep everyday Americans awake at night. Instead of focusing on the concerns of the average voter, they pander to the loudest voices on the far left, voices that often don't even reflect the core of their own supporter base. Maher's been trying to remind them of a basic political truth. Politics is local. It's about showing up for the people who elected you, listening to their struggles, and addressing the real, bread-and-butter problems that affect their daily lives. Yet somehow, this concept keeps flying right over the heads of figures like AOC, who appear more focused on ideological battles than practical governance. That Maher's frustration is clear. If Democrats want to regain trust, they need less performance art and more problem-solving. Right now, they're getting that balance completely wrong.
Our microaggression culture doesn't play in the Rust Belt. If a staffer hands you a speech that says menstruating people instead of women, don't say that. Say women. Don't put anyone fresh out of college in charge of the campaign. They've been given participation trophies their whole life. They don't know how to win.
Maher continues breaking down, point by point, the very woke missteps that helped sink the DNC in the elections, and he doesn't sugarcoat any of it. He calls out how the party practically tried to erase the concept of womanhood, replacing a word that has existed for thousands of years with bizarre clinical terms like menstruating people or birthing people, as if ordinary Americans were supposed to nod along and pretend that was perfectly normal. Then there's the obsession with radicalized education culture. Instead of teaching resilience, standards, and real achievement, the system started handing out participation trophies like candy. No effort required, no excellence expected. And Maher argues that this mindset eventually seeped into politics, activism, and even the workforce. Speaking of the workforce, he highlights another major issue. People being hired not because they were the most qualified, but because they checked the right demographic box. Merit took a backseat to identity, and voters noticed. According to Maher, these aren't tiny mistakes. They're glaring signs of ideological overreach, and they're exactly why the DNC lost its grip on reality, and ultimately, lost its connection with the voters.
Yes, I know every fiber of your being tells you the people you really want to reach are Guatemalan teenagers and bloggers in Gaza, but they can't vote. To a lot of folks in America, you come across as the cares about everybody but me party. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can find ways to stand up for these folks without being David Duke. This month, when the Democrats finally passed their big $1 trillion bill to rebuild our roads and bridges, 6 Democrats voted no because it didn't go far enough to address climate change, which I'm sure is true. What does? But this was free money from the federal government that would actually improve their constituents' lives. I can see a voter saying, you know, squad, I agree with you on climate change. But as long as it is happening, we also need money for getting the water pumped out of the subway.
The Democrats increasingly act like they care more about people overseas than the Americans living in their own backyard. They'll march passionately for Gaza, host emotional events for teens in Guatemala, and draft heartfelt petitions for communities in Afghanistan. But when it comes to decisions that actually impact American families, jobs, safety, housing, the cost of living, They stall, argue, or get tangled in ideological purity tests. Maher points to one glaring example: the massive funding package Democrats rejected simply because it didn't include climate provisions. Instead of taking the money to address urgent problems, crumbling infrastructure, overwhelmed cities, struggling households, they tossed the entire deal aside. It's as if suffering at home can wait. But symbolic global posturing cannot. Maher's argument is blunt but accurate. They could have accepted the funding, handled the immediate crisis, and then pushed for a separate climate-focused bill afterward. That's how practical politics works. But today's Democrats are so obsessed with ideological perfection that they'd rather let Americans struggle than compromise even a little. And voters see it clearly.
And then there's abortion. A difficult issue for the Democrats to lose on, but they're trying. For decades, liberals have said if only men could get pregnant, this wouldn't even be an issue. And abortion rights are women's rights. Well, that's wrong now. Or as the kids say, hold up. When the wokey end of the progressive spectrum talks about abortion now, they shy away from that word, women, and prefer terms like birthing people or people who menstruate, because somewhere there's a trans man who's pregnant, and I say good for him, and I'll be looking for his story somewhere in a future issue of Ripley's Believe It or Not.
The woke ideological wave reached its peak the moment the far left confidently declared that men can get pregnant, a claim so detached from biological reality that people didn't know whether to laugh or be alarmed. And to cement this newly invented doctrine, they even rolled out a pregnant man emoji, as if a digital cartoon could suddenly overwrite thousands of years of scientific understanding. It was ideological theater at its absolute peak. Predictably, the public reacted with shock, confusion, and a whole lot of raised eyebrows. People pointed out the obvious, asked basic questions, and tried to highlight just how far the conversation had drifted from reality. But instead of engaging, the far left erupted in outrage. Anyone who questioned the claim, even politely, was instantly accused of intolerance, bigotry, or hate. They weren't looking for discussion. They were demanding obedience. Suddenly, dissent wasn't disagreement. It was a cancelable offense. You were expected to accept the narrative without hesitation or risk being branded an enemy of progress. That's when it became painfully clear. This wasn't about inclusion anymore. It had morphed into ideological enforcement, and the average person simply couldn't keep up with the constantly shifting rules of woke correctness. And that brings us to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this.